So, today we're going to discuss something really important. ICE is engaging in fundamental violations of long established constitutional rights. In the case of United States versus Terry from 1968, the United States Supreme Court held that law enforcement officials, and that would include ICE, cannot stop someone on the street and ask to see their papers or otherwise make inquiries of them without reasonable, articulable individual suspicion. Without reasonable individual suspicion, it is unconstitutional for a law enforcement officer to say, "Show me your papers." That principle has been embedded in our laws since 1968, when the court handed down the very important decision of United States versus Terry. The decision was based on the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which protects the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. And that includes the right to be secure in those matters when you're in the public streets, when you're in public, when you're meeting your friends in public, when you're in a public establishment, when you're shopping, when you're in a bar, when you're in a restaurant. The Fourth Amendment protects you everywhere. It doesn't just protect you in your house. And the Supreme Court in United States versus Terry, in a very, very important decision, held that law enforcement officers can't simply detain you for no reason. They must have a reasonable individual suspicion. Now, what we have going on in Minnesota and throughout the country is that ICE is violating this fundamental constitutional principle. They are asking citizens to show them their papers without having any reason to suspect that any of the individual people are undocumented immigrants or otherwise. They're engaging in racial profiling. They're engaging in exactly the type of conduct that the United States Supreme Court said was forbidden many years ago. This is not controversial. Even conservatives understand that people have a right to privacy. They have a right not to fear law enforcement picking them up on the street and detaining them without any reason. Further, nothing in our long history requires people to carry their papers with them. You're not required to have a license with you when you leave the house to go running. You're not required to have your driver's license or passport with you when you leave the house to go grocery shopping. That's never been a requirement. You're not required to show people your passport or your driver's license simply because you're out in public. And the police have no right to expect you to have those documents with you. And that is true regardless of the color of your skin. That's true regardless of whether you're a citizen or whether you're here on some sort of visa. It's even true for people that are undocumented immigrants. Undocumented immigrants have rights as well. The decision in U.S. versus Terry didn't make an exception for undocumented immigrants. And even if it did, what ICE is doing throughout the country is they're just setting up roadblocks. They're going into neighborhoods, and if they have any reason to think, for whatever reason, that somebody might theoretically be an undocumented immigrant, they demand to see their papers. That's not how this works. U.S. versus Terry made clear that you have to have reasonable individual suspicion. That means the person that you are discussing this with must have more than just an accent of another language, or must have more than just the color of his skin being black or brown or Asian. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be more than somebody is working at a construction zone where people are known to be undocumented immigrants. It's got to be more than finding people on the parking lot of a Walmart where people go to pick up day work. It may be that some people that pick up day work, or that work in construction, or that work as maids, are undocumented immigrants. But that doesn't mean that all people that serve in those functions are undocumented immigrants. And law enforcement simply cannot assume, because you're part of a group that is seeking that type of employment, that you are an undocumented immigrant. And law enforcement has no right to stop those people at their places of employment, at schools, in courts, or otherwise, without having individualized suspicion that they may be undocumented immigrants. Moreover, we have this nonsense going on of ICE trying to make arrests in courthouses, in schools, and hospitals. They can't do that under United States versus Terry. They have to have a reasonable individual suspicion that that person has broken the law. Here's something that's fundamental. It is not a crime to be an undocumented immigrant. It is not a crime to be an undocumented immigrant. It is also not a crime to be here under temporary protective status. In fact, that means you're allowed to be here. It's also not a crime if you're here on a tourist visa or any kind of other visa. Law enforcement does not have the right to single you out simply because of the color of your skin, because of where you work, because of where you pray, for these types of interrogations. The fundamental difference between the United States and fascism is our law enforcement officials are subject to the rule of law. And that means they must abide by the concept of reasonable individual suspicion. They can't simply demand that all citizens, wherever they may be, show them their papers. The concept of show us your papers is something that is right out of Nazi Germany. That's what happened in Nazi Germany. That's what happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany, to the gays in Nazi Germany. Because they were blamed for all of the wrongs of society, the Nazis and the Gestapo required people to carry their papers. And if you didn't have your papers, you could be thrown in jail. That's not the law in the United States. There's no law in the United States that requires a citizen or anyone else in this country who leaves their house to carry a driver's license, to carry a passport, to carry their immigration status papers. And law enforcement officers in this country do not have the right to require someone to show their papers. Kristi Noem said the other day that she thinks that citizens must have the obligation to prove that they're citizens. That's nonsense. The assumption should be that if you're in this country on 2 feet or in a car, you're entitled to be here. Law enforcement must have individualized, reasonable suspicion, and it can't just be based on where you work, where you pray, or the color of your skin. The Trump administration is engaging in a fundamental violation of these basic constitutional principles. And frankly, it's time for our voices to be heard. It's time to protest, because these types of constitutional violations are what separates us from fascism. Right now, I hate to tell you, but we are on the road to becoming a fascist state. We must fight back against this violation of this fundamental legal principle of United States versus Terry. That is, law enforcement can't require you to show your papers or stop you or interrogate you without reasonable individual suspicion. That's been the law for many, many years, and the Trump administration cannot be permitted to ignore that law.